I have spent years reviewing longevity research. I have sat with data from the longest-lived populations on Earth, and I keep coming back to the same finding, one that most people completely overlook because it is not flashy, it is not a supplement, and it does not cost anything. But it is the single behavior that shows up without exception in every blue zone ever studied. And when you understand the neuroscience behind why it works, you will never look at your daily routine the same way again. Before we get into it, I want to ask you something small. If you find value in evidence-based content about living longer, living sharper, and keeping your mind fully intact into your 80s and 90s, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and activate the notification bell so you never miss what we publish next. Now, let us get into what the science actually shows. The blue zones. You may have heard the term. These are the 5 regions on Earth where people consistently live past 100 years old, not just surviving, but thinking clearly, remembering vividly, and staying mentally present in ways that most people in the modern world have completely lost by their 70s. Sardinia, Italy. Okinawa, Japan. Nicoya, Costa Rica. Icaria, Greece, and Loma Linda, California. Researchers spent decades inside these communities. They documented diets, sleep patterns, activity levels, social structures, medical histories. They were looking for the common thread, and they found several things people debate endlessly, whether it is the plant-based diet, the daily movement, the lack of processed food. But when they drilled down to the one behavior that appeared in every single blue zone, without exception, across wildly different cultures, different foods, different climates, different religions, it was not what most people expect. It was purposeful daily rest, a specific kind of mental downshift that these populations practice every single day without fail. Not sleep, not meditation in the formal sense, something that modern neuroscience now has a name for, and a very clear explanation for why it protects the aging brain in a way that almost nothing else does. Let me give you the neuroscience first, because this is where most health content fails you. They tell you what to do without telling you why. And without the why, you will not believe it enough to actually do it. Your brain has a network called the default mode network. Researchers at Washington University identified it in the early 2000s, and it changed everything we thought we knew about rest. The default mode network is a collection of brain regions: the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, the hippocampus, that activate specifically when you are not focused on an external task. When you stop working, stop scrolling, stop responding to demands, and simply let your mind exist without a directed purpose. For decades, neuroscientists assumed this network was just background noise, idle circuits, a brain doing nothing. They were completely wrong. What the default mode network is actually doing during those quiet moments is remarkable. It is consolidating memory. It is processing emotional experiences and integrating them into long-term storage. It is running what researchers call mental simulation, rehearsing future scenarios, connecting ideas, finding meaning in past events. It is, in a very literal neurological sense, the network responsible for your sense of self, your capacity for empathy, and your ability to think clearly about complex problems. And here is what makes this critical for brain aging. The default mode network is also the primary site of clearance for a protein called amyloid beta. This is the protein that accumulates in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease, and it is cleared most efficiently when the brain is in a state of quiet, purposeful rest, specifically during what neuroscientists call the glymphatic flush. The glymphatic system was only discovered in 2013 by Dr. Maiken Nedergaard at the University of Rochester, and it rewrote the textbook on brain health. The glymphatic system is essentially the brain's waste clearance network. Cerebrospinal fluid flows through channels surrounding the brain's blood vessels, washing out metabolic waste products, including amyloid beta, including tau proteins, including the cellular debris that accumulates from a day of intense thinking and stress. Here is the critical finding. The glymphatic system operates most powerfully during two windows. The first is deep sleep, which most people know about. The second, which almost nobody talks about, is during quiet waking rest, the kind of deliberate, low-stimulation downtime that centenarians in every Blue Zone practice as a non-negotiable daily ritual. In Sardinia, it is called the riposo, a midday pause typically between 1 and 3 in the afternoon. Where work stops, screens do not exist, and the mind is allowed to drift without agenda. In Okinawa, the same concept appears under the philosophy of Nuchigusui, rest as medicine. In Ikaria, researchers noted that nearly the entire island naps in the afternoon, and Ikaria has been called the island where people forget to die. Their rate of dementia is a fraction of what we see in the United States. This is not coincidence. This is biology. Now, here is where the modern world has made a catastrophic mistake. And I want you to understand this clearly because it directly affects your brain right now, today, regardless of your age. We replaced rest with stimulation. The moment a quiet moment arrives, waiting for coffee, sitting in a car, lying in bed before sleep, we fill it. We pick up a phone, we scroll, we play a podcast. We respond to messages. We have created a culture where the default mode network is never allowed to activate because there is always an external input competing for attention. And what happens neurologically when you chronically suppress the default mode network? A 2019 study published in the journal Nature Neuroscience found that chronic overstimulation without adequate rest periods leads to measurable reduction in hippocampal volume over time. The hippocampus is your memory center. It is the structure that determines whether an experience gets encoded into long-term memory or disappears. Shrinkage of the hippocampus is one of the earliest and most reliable predictors of cognitive decline. A separate study from the University of California found that people who engaged in quiet rest periods after learning new information retained up to 40% more of that information compared to people who immediately continued with stimulating activity. The rest was not passive. It was neurologically active. The brain was working, just in a different register. The centenarians in the Blue Zones were not stumbling onto rest because they had nothing better to do. They were, unknowingly, performing daily maintenance on the most complex organ in the human body. Now I want to talk about what this rest actually looks like, because this is where most people get it wrong when they try to replicate it. It is not watching television. It is not listening to music with lyrics. It is not scrolling quietly. All of these activities, however passive they feel, keep the prefrontal cortex in a directed attention state. They suppress the default mode network rather than activating it. Your brain is still processing external stimuli. The glymphatic flush does not engage. You feel relaxed, but neurologically, your brain has not shifted into the restorative state. What the research describes, and what the Blue Zone populations practice, is something closer to this. You stop. You sit or lie down. You let your eyes rest, either closed or softly unfocused. You do not direct your thoughts. You do not try to think about anything specific. You do not try to clear your mind either, because that is still a directed effort. You simply allow the mind to wander without a destination. Researchers call this undirected wakeful rest. It is the cognitive equivalent of taking your foot off the accelerator and letting the car coast. The minimum effective duration, based on current research, appears to be 10 to 20 minutes. Studies from Edinburgh University found that even a 10-minute period of quiet, wakeful rest after a cognitively demanding task produced measurable improvements in memory consolidation and mood regulation. 20 minutes showed significantly stronger effects. The Sardinian riposo averages 60 to 90 minutes, which may explain part of why Sardinia has one of the highest concentrations of male centenarians on Earth. And here is what I find most compelling about this entire body of research. The protective effect is not just about what rest does for the brain acutely. It is about what chronic rest deprivation does to the brain over a lifetime. Researchers at the National Institutes of Health conducted a study tracking cognitive health across several decades in adults over 50. They found that individuals who consistently reported adequate daily rest, not just nighttime sleep, but daytime downtime as well, showed dramatically slower rates of cognitive decline across every metric they measured. Processing speed, working memory, episodic recall, executive function. Across all of it, the rested group retained cognitive capacity significantly longer. What was striking was the dose response. It was not binary, rest or no rest. The benefit accumulated with consistency. People who had practiced regular daily rest for 10 or more years showed brain aging patterns that looked, on imaging, approximately 8 to 12 years younger than their chronological age. 8 to 12 years, not from a drug, not from a supplement, from a daily behavioral pattern that costs nothing and takes 20 minutes. I want to address something directly because I know what many of you are thinking. You are thinking you do not have time for this. That 20 minutes of doing nothing in the middle of a day is a luxury you cannot afford. That productivity demands your constant attention. I want you to hear this clearly. The research does not support that belief. In fact, it directly contradicts it. A study from NASA, yes, NASA, found that a 26-minute rest period improved pilot performance by 34% and overall alertness by 100% compared to a control group that did not rest. The performance improvement was not slight. It was dramatic. The brain that rests works better. Not later, not eventually, immediately afterward. The centenarians of the blue zones are not less productive because they rest. They are more cognitively intact because they rest. The oldest, sharpest minds on Earth did not get that way by grinding without pause. They got that way by treating rest as medicine, taken daily without negotiation. If you are watching this and thinking about your own parents, your own family, your own future, I want you to know something important. The research is clear that this intervention has meaningful benefit at every age. But the earlier you begin, the more protective the effect. The hippocampus is plastic. It responds to behavioral change. The glymphatic system will work more efficiently if you give it the daily windows it needs to do its job. What the blue zones teach us, again and again, is that longevity is not primarily genetic. Genetics account for roughly 20 to 25% of how long you live and how well your brain ages. The remaining 75% is behavioral. It is the accumulated effect of daily choices, practiced consistently over a lifetime. Rest is one of those choices. And according to every researcher who has studied the longest-lived, sharpest-minded populations on Earth, it may be the most underestimated one. If this has shifted something in how you think about your brain and how you protect it, share this with someone you care about. The people we love deserve to know that cognitive decline is not inevitable. That the science points clearly towards specific, actionable behaviors. And that something as simple and ancient as resting your mind every single day could be the difference between staying mentally present with your grandchildren at 85 and losing yourself in a fog you never saw coming. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, activate the notification bell so you are here when we publish the next piece, because the research on what the longest-lived minds on Earth have in common goes much deeper than a single video can hold. And we are only getting started. Take care of your mind. It is the only one you have. And the science says it is far more resilient than anyone ever told you, if you give it what it needs.